at 2 o'clock. So Maura, over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Dan. Welcome everybody today. Thank you for joining. This is a little bit of a continuation from a virtual roundtable that SSURF did a few months back about impact. There was a lot of interest in the subject, so we're happy to follow on and build some more around this idea. With that in mind, we brought together a very special group of people today who are going to be sharing an example of the way that they've shown impact through their experiences at user facilities and other organizations. I will introduce them briefly. So we're going to start with Aaron Stein. He's the Chief of Staff overseeing operations and the day-to-day at the Center for Functional Nanomaterials. He's also the project manager for the Nanoscience Research Center Recapitalization Project to revitalize the country's nanoscience infrastructure. He's been at CFN for over 20 years since it very began. So when he talks about his stories of impact, he's speaking from firsthand experience. So we're happy to have him today. We're also joined by Neil Byers from the Joint Genome Institute. He joined JGI in 2021 as in a newly created role as scientific impact analyst. He identifies JGI's impact and role in the scientific community, including collecting and curating data, tracing the effects of research outputs in the real world, presenting meaningful narratives of JGI's value to various stakeholder groups. He also leverages impact data to inform operational processes and decisions within JGI. His background is in libraries, archives, and data science. He's currently focusing on the use of machine learning tools with scientific texts for better understanding community applications of JGI's products and resources. His work is very exciting. It's been published recently in a Nature publication. We're excited to have him here. Finally, we have Shirley Han. She is currently the head of research analytics at Digital Science. Her work bridges science policy and data analysis, helping government and funding organizations to identify emerging research opportunities and make strategic impact and investment choices. In a previous role, Shirley worked as a program director at NSF. There, she was instrumental in establishing evaluation frameworks and for major initiatives like the Regional Innovation Engines, maximizing their impact on regional innovation and U.S. competitiveness. Prior to NSF, she was the assistant director at the Science and Technology Policy Institute, which supported the White House's OSTP on issues ranging from S&T policy to STEM education and workforce development. Shirley has a PhD in ecology, evolution, and marine biology, as well as a master's in applied statistics. So she brings a unique combination of analytical rigor and strategic foresight. Shirley also has an expertise in collaboration networks. Very happy to have you here today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the panelists. We're going to start with brief presentations from each, followed by a Q&A session afterwards. And with that, Aaron, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks so much, Maura. Pleasure to be here. As Maura said, I'm going to share these slides that I have. Seeing my screen? I think so. So as Maura said, I am at the Center for Functional Nanomaterials, which is at Brookhaven National Laboratory. And here we go. So just a quick introduction to talk a little bit about sort of some unique examples of user impact at the CFN. So just for background, we are operated by the Department of Energy, part of BES. We are one of 5, what's called the Nanoscale Science Research Centers. There are 5 of them spread across the complex. We've been in business since 2008, and we have a unique dual mission where our staff splits time equally between working on their own science and also supporting users. And this will kind of manifest itself a little ways in different ways we might have impact. So the facility is a materials lab. So we have sort of 3 different things that we're doing. We make materials, so we have facilities for synthesizing and fabricating structures. We have characterization, where we're characterizing materials through optical and electron and X-ray means, and then we also have a theory component, so we're kind of understanding materials through theory and computation. So that's a quick background on what we do, and So we do have impact, of course, through users coming in and coming in and using our facilities and publishing. But I'm going to kind of point out some sort of a little bit more off the normal path things. And the first one is our what we call the Quantum Material Press, or the Q Press. And the Q Press came about from a call from DOE for projects in QIS, which is quantum information, which the Department of Energy still has a lot of interest in. And so in this case, we kind of went out and we're saying, ask yourself, how can we have impact in this area? And we actually went out and talked to colleagues, scientists in certain areas, and potential users. And what we found is that in the area of two-dimensional materials, there was an area where we actually could play an impactful role. And so for those of you who don't know, two-dimensional material are things like graphene. They are atomic layer materials, and they have very unique properties, and in fact have tailorable properties when you start stacking them together. But it's a very labor-intensive process to make devices or stack these materials. And so we saw it might be a graduate student, might take hours, weeks, months, days to do this. And so we saw an area where we were uniquely situated as a national lab of user facility to create a capability that didn't exist. And so that's the Q Press. The Q Press automates all of these processes, and it was a $6 million project funded through this QIS, and it is now operational, and it has been for the last couple of years. And we've seen this impact. We've seen the initial community of users we spoke to, but a whole building a community around this. And you can see some, here's an example of a recent publication in Nature Photonics, where they're stacking these materials together using the Q Press and tailoring the optical response to this. And so this is kind of an example where, all right, we didn't really have any expertise in this area, but we went out and we built a machine, grew a community around it, and now we're building around that. So now we're building a sort of an ecosystem of capabilities around that instrument and giving a home for a user community. So this is an area, we're having impact, we're seeing that and building on that. A different area is sort of build out, I mentioned our scientists are doing their own research. And so this is an area where we have a scientist, Percy Zoll, who is building an instrument, a very unique instrument, which is a low temperature scanning probe microscope. So a scanning probe microscope is like an AFM, where you're scanning a tip along the surface and you're getting information about that. And this instrument is sort of unique in a user facility, works at low temperatures, and you can look at these kind of hydrocarbon materials with atomic resolution. People are looking at these molecules, you can see in the top right of the slide, that they've never really been able to image like this before. And so this is, his own interest, and then drawing in users, and users like ExxonMobil, who are looking at petroleum processing byproducts, looking at them where they've never been able to see them before, see what kind of materials are in these byproducts, and being able to tailor their process around that. And so that's impact there. And this is moving on. Then a new user, you see here, NASA, where they have these pieces of meteorite flying through space, and we're able to look at those pieces of meteorite in there and see that there are hydrocarbons in there, floating around in space, which really opens up a whole new world of science. So here we're having impact that stems out of sort of our own personal interests. And then the third example here is in reaching users that we don't normally reach. So COVID really spurred this, sort of the remote access. And so we've been set up, particularly our electron microscopes, which are things that maybe not a lot of people have access to, but also the same kind of people that might not be able to come to Brookhaven to do this work. And so we've set these up with remote capabilities, so that, in this example, users in Puerto Rico, we've run workshops in Puerto Rico, they've been able to develop a science program through this remote access, and it's really turned into high impact publications, as well as grants being received because of their ability to access instruments that they might not otherwise have access to. So that was a quick rundown. I was given 5 minutes. Those are sort of 3 examples of ways in which we think that we're expanding the user base beyond the normal day-to-day people coming in using our facilities and publishing great work. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions now or during the Q&A.
Thank you, Aaron. Maura, I don't see any questions just yet, so I'll continue on.
Yeah, you breezed through that, Aaron. Thank you so much. Yeah, okay, I'll move on. I had a question for sure about that remote access portal, but I'll wait to the Q&A. Yes, our next speaker is Neil Byers. He's going to present some work that he's done at JGI.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Great. I'm getting some nods. Yeah, so I am Neil Byers, and I am a data scientist and impact analyst at the Genome Institute. And for those of you who don't know us, JGI is part of Berkeley Lab and provides genomic and other omics services to the community. And I'm going to talk today a bit about how usage fits into the impact picture and provide an example of how we can use the full text literature for understanding usage. So when a lot of folks think about impact, they think of things like dollars and cents, or maybe things like tons of carbon removed from the atmosphere. And since JGI is a fundamental science shop as opposed to an applied shop, it's pretty difficult for us to robustly claim credit for these kinds of things out in the world, as they often occur pretty far downstream of the work that we do. So that said, we can use some quantitative measures to understand the impact we're having on our users' science. That is what we can influence more actively and directly, and that is what we can track and trace more concretely. So we know that JGI provides a lot of services to the community. What can we find out about how the community is leveraging those services? So a lot of this requires some creativity and outreach to get any sense of, but the following examples illustrate how we can leverage a somewhat tired data source, that is publications and citations, to understand some of this. So JGI maintains a number of publicly accessible online tools. We can use citation data to understand the work of individuals that are using our tools. So here's an example in which we can look at papers that cite or mention JGI's IMG platform, which is a resource for microbial genomes and metagenomes. Using dimensions and its full text search capabilities, I can find about 8,500 of these papers. Now, these papers can be clustered thematically, which I've done here using ensemble of text and network-based approaches. So I then took those clusters and did some spot checking on keywords to get a sense of the themes that distinguish the groups of publications. And then I threw the titles and abstracts of each group of publications into ChatGPT to generate some topic summaries from the titles and abstracts so we can get a kind of more cohesive sense of what each group of publications represents. So this purple one that you see here, for example, focuses on natural products and biosynthetic gene clusters. And this network that you see here, each dot represents a publication that cites IMG. This teal one includes publications focused on humans, mostly looking into gut microbiota. This little pink group seems to heavily focus on microbial capabilities for degrading hydrocarbons. And finally, this green group seems to revolve around studies of cyanobacteria and their nitrogen fixation capabilities. So we can see some of the research goals the users of our tools are pursuing, as well as the relative frequencies of papers in those areas. We can then try to understand what it is these folks are doing with our tools. So in a sense, this is a similar means for examining the other side of the coin from my previous slides. What you see here is the output of a somewhat convoluted workflow, I admit, that uses large language models to extract portal use case statements from the full text of articles that mention Phytosome, our plant genomics resource. Again, I was able to identify which papers these were using dimensions, after which I pulled the full text from a source called Semantic Scholar. And so after I have the full text, I can run a clustering operation over the LLM outputs about use cases to begin categorizing these various use cases that we see in those papers. So this golden yellow cluster at the bottom consists of statements about using Phytosome for analyzing locations of genes and other sequences on the chromosomes of different plant species. This little blue cluster shows folks leveraging Phytosome to look at synteny in and between genomes. Here we have folks conducting searches for homologous genes and proteins. This is a group of clusters, actually, where people mention conducting various kinds of BLAST searches, which is a way to search the sequences within individual organisms. And here we have people using Phytosome to help design primers for wet lab processes, and so on for all of the groups that you see. So using these kinds of toy examples, we can get a sense of how all of this fits into the larger question we're trying to answer. What is JGI's impact as a public user facility? So if we know which of our services folks are using, as well as how we're using them, and if we know what specific research goals that usage has helped to achieve, then we can make much more coherent and grounded statements about the role that we play in a larger scientific ecosystem. And that is the only way. That is one of the ways that we can articulate our impact as a public user facility. And that's what I got. So I will pass it on back to Maura or Dan.
Great.
Great, thanks so much, Neil. And then finally, we have Shirley, who's going to talk a little bit about what work she's done.
Thank you. I can't see what screen I'm sharing, so I'm sharing my entire screen. So give me 1 second here.
You're living on the edge here.
Yes. Okay, let's see here. I am hoping that I am able to share, although it might not let me. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you all so much for having me. So as Maura introduced a little bit, my background has been primarily working within the federal government with a host of different agencies and institutions, primarily looking at S&T policy research, but with a focus of looking at innovation ecosystems and global competitiveness, and how can we determine and assess and monitor the impacts of the policies, the programs that the federal government might be using to drive innovation, and how successful are we at those. So primarily I have been using data-centric approaches to really look at how these innovation ecosystems emerge, how are they maturing, how can we see if they're making progress, and so forth. So a core question that has been across the federal government from multiple administrations is, of course, what can we do to facilitate the successful development and long-term sustainability of U.S. innovation ecosystems? Of course, we want to know how our innovation ecosystems, how can we make sure that those are successful and that they're being maintained? And a critical piece of this puzzle has fallen onto partnerships. So I think you all can all think about ways that partnerships really enable faster and more efficient innovation, knowledge sharing, resource sharing, facilities sharing, of course, is a huge one. And the questions really come from are organizations forming new partnerships, and are those current partnerships really gaining in strength, and do you see new connections, and do you see those actually building in quality and so forth. In particular, there's been a lot of focus on cross-sector partnerships, and this is primarily because we know that for the most part, if you're thinking about moving things from the TRLs 1 through 9, this is not happening in silos, and that this really is very much a team sport. Academia is primarily driving TRLs 1 through 3, and at some point, though, there needs to be a handover to more private sector industry, manufacturing, and then you have to start thinking about scaling at the industrial level. So it really requires probably several rounds of handoff between different kinds of players across different kinds of sectors. And of course, a fundamental barrier to this is everybody's very familiar with working and knowing which organizations are within their own sector. So academic institutions know which other academic institutions are the big players within a particular subfield. Manufacturing facilities know who other competing manufacturing facilities that can offer similar processes and so forth. But what about finding the key players outside of your sector? And so this has pretty much been what I have been working on 10 to 15 years. But it's such an interesting area of research, and there's always so much more data looking at this. So using dimensions data, of course, we can look at this using publication and patent data to map that innovation landscape. And I've done this to primarily look at 3 things. So can we unearth current partnerships? So a lot of organizations are just interested, who have they been partnering with? Ideally, there's a nice long database of who all your partners are, but most likely it's sitting across multiple Excel sheets, across multiple individuals in your organization. And it's a little hard to see what that looks like. So looking at the co-authoring of publications and co-assignment of patents, we can look at this larger current partnership landscape. Also looking at kind of network health, which is looking at the quantity and quality of collaborations over time. So if we're thinking of partner organizations as nodes and the connections and collaborations of those as edges, do we see stronger edges over time? Ideally, I think that's what everybody would like to see, right? You're having multiple collaborations with strong partners, and it's not just a one-off partnership that's happening over time. And then, of course, identifying potential new partners. So which organizations or which experts are working in the same space that you're working in, so that you can actually identify individuals as well as companies that you're interested in working with potentially in the future to make things more efficient and more effective, to share those knowledge and resources. So ultimately, I think when a lot of people think about publication or patent data, it's a lot about counting, which it is. There's nothing wrong with counting, but it's also, I think, if you're thinking about impact, it's really thinking about potentially finding hidden ways, particularly in this space, human and organizational networks that really can drive scientific progress. And especially if you're thinking about what are the partnerships that are happening when you're looking at TRLs 1 to 3? How is that changing as you're moving along the TRL spectrum? And you can start seeing the shift that gradually happens. And by understanding how these networks shift over time, user facilities can really think better how to strategically connect their users, because they're all potential partners, and help quantify that long-term impact, and then help build those partnerships that's going to be crucial to take these things from TRLs 1 through 9.
Thank you so much, Shirley. So I have been remiss, and I forgot to mention that the reason why SSURF asked Digital Science to host this particular roundtable is because we have a platform called Dimensions, which measures some of the data sets that Shirley and Neil have referenced. This includes publications, patents, grants, a couple other things. It is not by any means all of the data that was used to compile their results, but it certainly represents some, and we've worked with both of them. So before I move on to the Q&A portion, we invited my colleague, James Wright. He's a solutions architect at Digital Science. He works with lots of our government and enterprise customers to help them develop workflows and processes, whether that's customized to them or built from this platform. And he's just going to show us Dimensions for a couple of minutes so you know what the heck we're talking about when we say all of this data.
Thank you, Maura.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, so I'm James Wright. As Maura introduced me there, I am a technical specialist here at Digital Science working on our Dimensions platform. And this is what Dimensions looks like. And I'm just going to tell you pretty quickly, super rapid overview about what it is, what it can do, and why we're here today. So our lovely panelists have talked about impact and the ways that they show impact from their user research facilities and their agencies, and how they can conceptualize that, measure that, operationalize that, present it to other people, right? Stakeholders or the public or whoever they need to. And so Dimensions is a tool that helps them do that. It's one of many tools in their tool belt, but Dimensions is the world's largest linked research database. And so what we mean by that is we cover every element of the research lifecycle, from grants when funding is decided on, to preprints and publications and data sets at the publication phase, and then onwards from there, everything that follows post-publication, citations, clinical trials, patents, policy documents. And we have all of that in this platform, connected up and searchable, indexable via the full text of all of these different data types. What you're looking at here is a paid version of Dimensions, right? This is a subscription version, but there is a free version of Dimensions. If you go to dimensions.ai, and we can leave some of this behind or answer in the Q&A, you'll be able to sign up for a free account, and you can get a bit of a preview of things that Dimensions can do, and you will be able to do some of this analysis that you've heard of today, including searching through these full text options. You will have less stuff here and less stuff here at the top than what you're currently seeing, but you will still have plenty that you can dig into. And so just really quickly, here are all of these various data types again, and there's lots of different filters that we have here on that left-hand side. You can identify your use of research facility as funding or assistance that it's provided. You can identify it as research that it's helped perform. You can filter this down by years. You can filter this down by specific researchers or specific collaboration opportunities. And this tool here, Dimensions, will allow you to find sort of all of that stuff. And I have one quick example. While Neil was talking, he mentioned, while Neil was talking, he mentioned using Dimensions to identify a set of documents identified with a full text query regarding IMG, which is a tool at JGI. And I thought about Aaron's example at the start, where he was talking about the quantum material press or the Q press at his facility. And so if we look for instances of quantum material press or the Q press in publications, I added not SQL because I found out that there's a QPress package that has to do with SQL. But we can add this live. And right here, we're able to find 193 publications, 3 grants, 34 patents, and 14 policy documents that identify using the quantum material press or have something to do with the QPress in a very, very easy, quick search that surfaces all of these documents that you can now go through and discover who these researchers are, where they're researching, what their downstream impact has been, what these works have led to in terms of patents or policy outcomes, or again, further downstream impacts if you look at the stuff that cites this stuff, and so on and so forth. So just a really quick example. There's a whole lot of things Dimensions can do. Happy to answer more questions during the Q&A process, but just wanted to show you a little bit about this tool, how it can be used for impact, and what it is, since it was mentioned a couple times throughout the presentations today. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Okay. At this point, I'd love to open this up to Q&A, any questions that came up or anything you want to just know more about our panelists. As the moderator, I get control, so I'm going to start by asking a question of the panelists. You can all follow, which is, so of all the work that you guys have done, which one seems to have the most resonance with your stakeholders? Like, what's the one that's really hit the hardest?
All right, I see Neil's ready to jump right in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that I see people really kind of opening their eyes at when I talk about this kind of stuff is when you're able to trace something like a citation in a paper, like say we put out a data set, or that, you know, our users send us our samples and we provide them a data set. And then later on that data set gets used in some kind of paper publishing some, you know, new method for breaking down plastic or something like that. And then later down the line, that technology then is used in a patent by some organization that's interested in commercializing or actually building something that is going to act on that system for breaking down plastic. And then people are going out there and using that system to break down plastic. So that's like a chain of effect that you see from the original thing that we produced towards something tangible out there in the world that, you know, people can think about as a, you know, if you're a taxpayer, for example, and you're like, what am I paying for all this government science for? You know, you can point to government science's role in reduced plastic in the ocean because of that chain of effect that produced that technology that is now doing things that weren't previously possible. So people really, really like to see, you know, a lot of times people's eyes will glaze over when you talk about publications because they're so used to hearing about that and seeing stuff about publications. But when, you know, occasionally I'm able to like actually like look at a chain of how our stuff led to something in, you know, out there in the world, so to speak. And I think that really, really resonates with people and sticks in people's minds in ways that I have trouble achieving when I'm just throwing numbers out there with the types of data sets that I run.
Yeah, Shirley, you don't need to raise your hand. Thank you.
So I cannot agree more with Neil than that. I think it's ultimately this kind of translational of research. You know, are things going from basic research down to product and into the market? But it's incredibly hard, especially that last piece, to track from patent to product to market. But with that said, I think with respect to partnerships, I think what has been very useful, I think, for the stakeholders to see is really kind of the quantity versus quality of partnerships. So I think it's very common. Organizations tend to say, we have X number of partners or partnerships with other organizations, and that number tends to be very high. But in reality, it's the quality of the partnership that is really important, because if you're not actually sharing kind of risks, if you're not both kind of in the game together and sharing knowledge or resources or personnel to really kind of advance things, those partnerships are primarily just on paper. So it's can you actually see that, very much as Neil said, right? Do you see those partnerships actually coming into fruition? So do you see co-publications? Do you see co-patents? That which signifies that there's actually stake in partners with stake in the game.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to what those guys said, because I kind of agree. I think the things that resonate with the stakeholders is when there's like a story to tell, right? Like, I think you can look at statistics. The statistics are part of the story, but there's this narrative. And so you heard me talk about the QPress, and that was really great to see those numbers. But so there's a story there, and that story leads to those numbers are part of the story, or the papers are part of it. But there's a story that leads to that, and it's who you're involved with, what you're doing, how you got from A to B to C to D. And so I think that's what we want. And so I think all of these things working together to tell a story, as opposed to just spitting out numbers or spitting out a list of collaborators. And so, but part of the numbers are part of it, but also there's a story to be told in them. So you don't want to just rely on one or the other. You want both of those to work together. And that's really resonates a lot, I think.
Right. Thank you all. Maura, could I jump in? There were a couple questions put in the chat. The first one actually was right after James's presentation. So going back into the realm of the dimensions, James, if you see that question, Brandon was asking about the chat with PDF function. Can you elaborate a little bit on how that works?
Yeah, so it works exactly as Brandon has typed. And so I didn't click send, but I typed "you are correct" and then just left it sit there in the box. But yeah, if you click that chat with PDF, it opens up a companion product to Dimensions called ReadCube, and it allows you to chat within the ReadCube window with the PDF. You're essentially asking an LLM plugin live inside of the document questions about that document, or even a set of documents. And so you can say, what's the sample size? What method was used? How did they use this tool? Can you translate this portion to German or whatever you need to do as you deal with the PDF, and it'll give you back semantic and plain language answers, the same as if you were using any LLM bot. It's just specific to that individual PDF in the moment.
Great. Thank you. And then from Brandon Bruff. Brandon, great to see you online here. The question directed to you, Aaron. If you've seen that, he's curious about if the CFN is mining the collective raw data across all users on a particular tool. Is there a certain tool that's being used, and really how can user facilities best take advantage of so much data being collected in one place?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, we are not really doing that, and that's sort of I think a next frontier. There is a lot of data out there, and it should be it's the kind of thing we would like to do. And so there are multiple tools. We have multimodal measurements, and being able to tag that or have that searchable in some way is definitely something we'd like to be able to do. We're not there yet, but I will add, when we talk about the QPress, which has already come up, the ultimate idea of the QPress is that we will be developing a library of these two-dimensional materials. So as we go forth, there will be a library of these 2D materials that people can draw from. And so as we build up users in our own science, that is something that everyone can benefit from. And also there is, which I didn't get into, there's sort of this machine learning aspect to it, where the tool is looking around at the flakes and identifying them. And that's something that also over time. So there's, in some ways it's in the background, but I think the question is there an explicit way you could go out and search the data? And we don't have that yet, but that's definitely something that is in our future plans for sure. I think it's a challenge. It's a big challenge because the data is large. There's a lot of it. And so coming up with a way to search it would be good.
Hmm. Right. Shirley or Neil, would you have any other comments on so that topic that Aaron's describing? Any suggestions? If budget and resources weren't a concern, what would be the way to do that?
I think that's how they do it at the joint JGI, right? I think probably Neil probably has some good insights into that.
Yeah, I might not be understanding the question, so I apologize if that's the case. But at JGI, it's sort of built into our service model to do what I think this question is asking about. So the way that we work is essentially as a user submits a proposal, they send us their physical samples. We do all the genomic sequencing or synthetic biology or metabolomics associated with those samples that they're asking for, give them their data, and then they go publish on it, with the caveat that all of that data gets sent to our online portals and is hosted in public places so people can come do all of these things with it afterwards. And so because users need to access their data that we're providing them, we can also we also basically have ready-made means for offering that to the public anyways. And it's all indexed and made interoperable in lots of different ways across these various portals. And the two tools that I was talking about in my talk, Vitazome and IMG, are ways for doing that for plant genomes and then for microbial genomes and metagenomes respectively. And so I think with genomics in particular, we are the type of data we work with makes us particularly well positioned just to offer that as part of our service model. And so it's just something that's been built into what we do basically from the start.
Hmm.
I was curious, Aaron, when you mentioned that it's multimodal, what sort of dimensions are you trying to gather information around?
Well, so we might be, for example, when I say multimodal, we might be looking at something, an electron microscope to look at the atomic structure, and then we might be looking at it with an ultra-fast laser setup to look at, do spectroscopic measurements or X-ray. And so we have the symphony of instruments, and so we're looking yes, different size scales, but also different kinds of information, right? We might be looking at internal atomic structure, then we might be looking at how the surface reacts in certain conditions, or we might be looking at spectroscopic or things of that nature. So so in some instances, some of our users have like a real large, rich set of data. And just to go back to what Neil was saying, like we didn't build that into our model at the beginning, and probably in retrospect, having a way to share that data. But most of our model has been, users coming, getting data and taking it with them. And of course it sits there, but it's not in any sort of organized way. And so, obviously in retrospect, I think that came later, where we're saying, oh, there's all this data could be used generally and put together, and so it's a challenge to do it generally. Obviously, our users are taking away the data they need, though.
Could I go in another direction? We had a great question from David. He asked, how do you encourage people to credit or cite user facilities when they're not a formal part of the collaboration? Wonder if there might be either protocols, or is it all in a sort of good faith, on your honor, or hoping people do so? I think it's a little more structured than that, but who could describe? Neil, yes.
I can describe JGI's experience with that. The short answer is you can poke and prod and gives all kind of messages and tell them to do X, Y, Z, but folks, for example, that are just logging into something, downloading data, and then going and publishing on it, there's no way that we can enforce formal acknowledgement of that. A lot of people will cite things in the ways that the community is used to citing data, for example, or they'll cite a piece of software the way that they're used to citing software. That data or that software, for example, came from JGI specifically is not always immediately apparent at the place that they access that software or data. And a lot of times the places you can get that stuff are not accompanied by formal requests for acknowledgement. If you go through JGI systems specifically, there's all of these different points in which a user is confronted with a request to acknowledge us in a specific way. But a lot of people just click acknowledge, and just click right through it and then get their data and go do what they're going to do. And so we just don't have a way of enforcing that. And so the way that I get around that is, I have a pretty detailed and comprehensive list of all the things that we produced and put out there. And so the goal was not to look for citations of JGI specifically, but to look for formal and informal citations of the things that we produce, like our data portals or like some of the software that we produce, for example. And so that kind of cast your net a little bit wider in capturing all of this usage of our products that doesn't actually go through a formal proposal.
I will sort of add on to what Neil said. So this was information that I gathered a few years ago, so I'm not entirely sure how current it is. But there are third-party nonprofit organizations like ORCID that, in addition to, of course, having personal identifier numbers for individuals, they were also looking at potentially providing badges or micro-credentials where people can indicate that they used a particular user facility, or even within a user facility, a particular type of equipment. So if electron microscope or some kind of very unique equipment, so that they can say that they had hours on that particular thing and link those to publications. So I agree with Neil, I don't believe there is any kind of formal process that you can actually require people to acknowledge in any particular way, but there are potentially ways that you can say, if our user facility ID is this with a particular whatever site it is, and if you're using time on it, then you can, create a badge that you're using our particular thing and linking it to any kind of publication, so that that information is available somewhere at least.
Yeah, and I would add, I agree. There's sort of no one way to do it, but I think we request, and then you request multiple times, and then there's sort of different nets that you're putting there to get them, and one of the things that happens is that people are submitting proposals multiple times and they're coming back, and so one of the questions is, well, how have you used the time at our facility in the past? And so they will show you publications, and that's something where you say, well, hey, this publication wasn't on our list. So that's another one, right, where you're hopefully if they're putting out good work, they're going to come back for more. So there's many ways in which you kind of capture that, but generally it is a little bit honor system, but obviously with a lot of nudging. And the other thing I'll say is that there's a lot of different levels in which we have people engage our center through. A lot of times there's a lot of co-authorship. You saw that list of the QPress. There's a lot of the person that runs that are going to become co-author, because there's a lot of active engagement in the science where we're not just sending data, we're actively engaged in the science. So obviously there's a lot of co-authorship as well, but you're never going to get them all. And so there's different nets you put in at different time and hope that you get them. But we would like to be cited or referenced or acknowledged, certainly in any work that's been done there. That's the ultimate goal.
Right. I can see that. I think as you were describing in your presentation, Aaron, or I'm getting this thread across everyone's comments, the ability to assess this impact, and a facet of that being the attribution by any given user or any given almost stakeholder, the attribution that they got this data from user facilities can add to further discussions or a rationale for investment and upgrades and otherwise support for the user facilities. So that might be part of it, at least informally. The additional prompt of please give us attribution this is how we will be able to continue to provide the resources that you're drawing upon. Hoping people can connect those dots.
For sure. And I think like the best commercial for our facility and these facilities is someone did really good work about it and they're talking about it. So we want them to make sure that they're either, whether talk, a paper, whatever, that's a big part of it is certainly attribution. And that's for the reasons you're saying, that we want to be able to continue the work, continue to invest in that particular capability, but also to let other potentially high impact users know that really great work can be done at these facilities. So it's a big part of it for sure.
Oh, and thank you for that comment, Brendan, about the molecular foundry. I like that. A little bit of structural peer pressure, at least, to be sure you give credit where credit's due.
Carrot and a stick, right? James, I actually wanted to ask you along that line. So one of the things that we have in Dimensions is access to the full text of publications,
Yep.
which does sort of probably not as cleanly and comprehensively as what Neil does, but it certainly help you dig into something like references to people or tools or topics that you wouldn't be able to get to. I don't know if you want to maybe show it or talk about it.
Certainly.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know what to
absolutely.
say.
I can. No, it's a good point. And so one thing that Dimensions is really good at in terms of this impact story is identifying when you sort of get maybe a sideways attribution in an article, but not an official one, right? Maybe it's not exactly in the citations. Maybe it's not exactly in the format that you're used to scraping for, but we're able to search through full text. So if there is a mention of that QPress anywhere in this article, we're going to go ahead and dig it up. And so that could be inside of the acknowledgments. It could be in the conflict of interest. I don't know why it would be, but it could be in the funding statement, or it could be somewhere in the middle of the paper, right? So it could say, thank you, using this tool or using this method or using this innovation, or because we were at blank lab or blank facility, we were able to do the following. And that may not appear in traditional citation metrics that are normally the most easy to surface, but we'll be able to pull those up. Additionally, what we are able to do is, since we have access to that full text, we can identify very easily. You just pop open this little funder button. We're going to go ahead and search for Brookhaven because it's what I decided to search for. And this is going to show us all of the papers that have received funding from Brookhaven. But Brookhaven doesn't sort of give grants directly that contain Brookhaven's name. So then what do we mean by funding? All of these papers in here are going to have an acknowledgement section or a funding statement or something where it says this paper made possible by Brookhaven National Lab, or thanks to this tool at Brookhaven, or thanks to so and so, or in collaboration with such and such at Brookhaven. And so we're able to immediately surface over 18,000 publications, 40,000 data sets, and 31 patents that directly mention assistance from Brookhaven in this sort of way, without necessarily using a conventional citation, perhaps, right, of some sort. So you're able to surface a whole bunch of this information really easily with just a couple of clicks. You can set alerts for these, and so they'll trigger every time something new gets added that meets this criteria. You can filter this down further. So if you only want to see the last couple of years, if you only want to see it by certain researchers, if you only want to see it by when Brookhaven has done work alongside some other organization, so what has been produced by Brookhaven and Argonne, etc. And so you have lots of ways that you can go ahead and tell the impact story using this particular tool. And that all starts with our ability to surface all of the documents to start with, to cast a wide net, because I think the through line here, the heart of that question was, we don't know what we don't know, right? If people don't attribute us, how do we know that we contributed to that article, and then what that article's downstream impact is, without lots of labor and constant literature surveillance to see what's coming out? And somebody else mentioned Molecular Foundry, right? When they reapply, we have to go make sure, did they mention us in their last couple of pubs? But then there's still some questions there, right? Like, do you have all their pubs that they may have mentioned you in? Do you know if they did mention you, but in a sideways sort of way? And so what Dimensions can do is help you sort of surface those things you don't know, bring those unknowns to the front that allow you to kind of do that next level impact work that you need to do.
Hmm. Right. All right. I have a couple other questions, Maura, that I would prompt.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I had some
If,
too. Go ahead.
I'm sort of interested, this may not be the role for Aaron, but I wonder, Shirley, or perhaps Neil, knowing your role is, as I understand, relatively newer, how does all this data that you're able to aggregate help inform further sort of communications, or provide a narrative for a trend line of impact that you then are looking to implement, or bring into additional types of conversations that aren't necessarily with users, but are maybe with other stakeholders that need to understand these stories of impact? Where does this data basically get applied?
Neil has fallen off of my screen, so I can't tell if he's. Did
Oh.
you want to go first, Neil?
No.
I will let you go first, Shirley, but I can follow on with whatever you have to say. Thank you.
Sure. Given who I have worked with in the past, primarily kind of supporting OSTP, and also working with NSTC subcommittees and PCAST and so forth, all of this data actually does roll up, because at the end of the day, when policy decisions are wanting to be made, administrations are going to be asking, what is the impact of, let's say, partnerships? Should the federal government be requiring more things like public-private partnerships? How do we know if this is working, right? What is the return on investment for these kinds of policies? And that goes to federal agencies as well. They want to know if they're going to be asking for public-private partnerships, that they have a way to show that this was it's cost effective, and that it led to better or more impact than it would have been if it was just the federal government alone, for instance. So all of this really does roll up, and it like Aaron said, it creates that narrative and story, because the numbers alone is it doesn't mean anything unless there's context. So you have to know kind of where your starting ground is, where you're beginning, and then ideally you have a goal or target that you're reaching, and this allows you to actually monitor and track whether you're making progress towards that, because without it, a number is just a number, and it doesn't tell you if you're doing well or if you're doing poorly, if you don't have a target and if you don't have a benchmark to compare it against.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Mike's Dan, if you had a follow to what Shirley said, I can wait to tell you.
No, actually, it was just sort of giving a thank you for that comment. If you had something else that you wanted to add, Neil, please speak.
I think that this is actually the hardest part of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
At least in the space that JGI exists in, we live as part of the Department of Energy, which is a very broad, like the org chart for the Department of Energy is this humongous thing. It just has all these little tendrils that spin out in all of these different directions. And so there's a very kind of formal means for talking about our work and for reporting on what we're doing and things that we're asked for, from like higher levels up the chain in the DOE. And that a lot of that kind of calcifies in a way that stays the same over the years. And so changing that conversation for, if say we have all these metrics or all of these things that we're asked to report, and that's just kind of the common thing that we're supposed to talk about. Changing that conversation is not easy, because not only do you have to get the internal folks that are normally responsible for reporting to get on board with reporting something different, you also have to get the people that you're reporting to, like for us it would be our program managers at DOE, for example, conversant in these new kinds of things that you're trying to propose are indicators for your impact. And so there's all these different people involved that sort of have to change what they're used to, and change, sometimes decades old processes for, how we're supposed to conduct this conversation about how our work is being done and what our impact is. And it's just kind of a glacial thing, sort of melting those standards for, how you talk about the work that you're doing. So getting people on board is difficult. It's the first bit. The other bit is there's all kinds of different stakeholders, and they're all looking for different things. What our program managers are interested in is different than what a potential user would be interested in. So if I'm a potential user and I'm coming to JGI, talking about how many Nature or Science publications folks who have submitted proposals to us have been published in is a very attractive thing, because a lot of scientists at universities, for example, are very motivated for tenure and for graduate students and so on, to get as high profile publications as possible. And so if that's something we can contribute to, then people are certainly very interested in that. There's a lot of folks that aren't interested in publications or what journals they're in different stakeholder groups, for example, in DOE. What they want to know is, how we're contributing to progress on DOE mission goals, which is a very, very different type of statement. And so answering the needs of both of those groups of stakeholders involves very different types of data and very different ways of approaching the question. And both of them are challenging for different reasons. And so, how does this get applied? I would say it depends on it depends on who you're talking to, what group of stakeholders you're interested in, and what the kind of community cultural norms within that group of stakeholders is.
That's all right. So I've been able to read the mind of the new Secretary of Energy, for example. There's one stakeholder group of one, perhaps, that we need to understand what language or metrics he's looking to see.
Absolutely.
But Maura, I think it looks like we would have time for maybe one last question or otherwise any last comment from given panelists. Did you have anything left you still wanted to ask? No?
Yeah. So that ties us up at the hour. We certainly have time if anybody would like to stick around for a couple more minutes, ask the panelists any more questions you might have been a little hesitant to ask in front of the group. We're happy to stick out, but otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope it was helpful for you, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Yes, thank you all, and thank you to all the panelists. I will stop recording, and we will stay on here. I know, frankly, in the atmosphere we've all been in, sometimes people are just a little more reserved if there's recording going on, or even just being in a larger group. So the formal part of the roundtable is over. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.